Point of order is accepted. We are recording. Kathryn.
Good evening. Thank you to the Democratic Town Committee for hosting this forum and offering the opportunity for us to answer some of the community's concerns and questions. I'm Kathryn Coughlin, and I'm running for Natick Select Board because I think that the town faces several interrelated critical challenges in the next couple of years. And my experience working with budgets, zoning, diverse communities, and as a small business owner would serve me well to work with the board in tackling these challenges. My husband and I moved to our starter home in West Natick about 20 years ago, where we still live. We spent a year looking for a community where we wanted to settle down, raise a family, and we chose Natick. We chose it for its lovely downtown, its developing arts and culture scene, its great schools, and at that time, its affordability. 2 decades later, Natick has grown tremendously with more parks and recreation, vibrant TCAN programs, a few new restaurants, and so many more amenities. But it has unfortunately lost much of its affordability. At the same time, we're facing an operational override to address a continued structural, budget deficit, which was exacerbated by 2 years of pandemic-induced revenue loss. Now, my professional background in university and nonprofit management has provided me with experience in developing creative ways to raise revenue. It required me to produce balanced budgets every year, while at the same time increasing programmatic output. It taught me to work with vastly different constituencies with differing priorities and approaches. As a select board member, I will support the town administrator and the school superintendent in developing a budget that provides for the town's needs and at the same time looks to establish a long-term strategic plan to eliminate the structural deficit. I will support efforts to expand our affordable housing stock, including the adoption of the Community Preservation Act and updating town bylaws to allow for more inclusive housing options. I will support efforts to move Natick to 100% renewable energy in the residential and municipal energy aggregation programs by 2030. Now, as a select board member, I intend to support the board's mission to promote diversity, inclusion, and remove barriers to equitable access in several ways. First, I will actively participate in the search for the town's first DEI officer, seeking the highest qualified person to serve the needs of Natick. And I will encourage the Economic Development Committee, working with the DEI officer, to encourage the EDC, or the Economic Development Committee, to identify ways the town might encourage business development by traditionally marginalized communities. And I will work to encourage and expand economic development by, among other things, supporting a single tax rate for residential and commercial properties. I look forward to talking to you about my ideas for Natick, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kathryn. And now, Bruce. Bruce, you're muted.
I keep thinking I'm going to be automatically muted. Okay, thank you. I'm Bruce Evans. I'm running for Select Board to serve you and to make Natick the best community it can be. I'm the son of immigrants who came to this country as young adults and emphasize the importance of being active in the community. My father was a typesetter at the New York Times, an employee representative for the Typesetters Union. He served as a town councilman and founded the Youth Soccer League. My mother managed the household of 4 boys while working part-time. I met Terry while getting my MBA and spent a career in high-tech marketing, which brought us to Massachusetts, and we've lived in Natick for 27 years. This is a remarkable town with challenges that call for proven leadership. That's what I offer. In over a decade on the Finance Committee, I've reviewed town budgets and all matters brought to town meeting. As Education Subcommittee Chair, I bridged the gap between school and town budgets. As FinCom Secretary, I co-produced the town meeting recommendation book, and I'm a town meeting member myself for 11 years. I'm a longtime youth baseball and basketball coach and a regular volunteer at TCAN, at Morse Institute Library, and Penn Mass Challenge. I'll briefly describe my priorities, starting with fiscal sustainability. Natick has a budget deficit that was worsened by the pandemic. I'll look for and promote strategies to improve efficiencies and increase revenues. That's where economic development comes in. Natick relies on a thriving commercial sector. This benefits residential taxpayers because these tax revenues fund services that residents use, but businesses don't. Environmental sustainability is imperative. As Capital Subcommittee Chair, I championed making the town more sustainable. I'm on the building committee for Kennedy Middle School, Natick's greenest municipal building. To be the best we can be, we must prioritize diversity, affordability, town services, and accessible government. The 2020 census shows 21% of us identify as non-white. That's one reason why Natick must be an inclusive community. I strongly support the creation of the DEI committee and will implement its recommendations and bring diversity to town government and the wider community. We must make the town government accessible to all, improving communications and outreach. The Chief Information Officer has an important role to play there. To ensure the delivery of excellent town services, we must identify and address areas where we are under-resourced. Finally, affordability is a real concern. I'll work to diversify housing options and increase tax relief to keep residents from being priced out of Natick. In closing, I ask for one of your 2 votes for Select Board on Tuesday, March 29th. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. And Cody.
Thank you. So I want to thank the, first of all, I guess I should introduce myself for people who don't know me. My name is Cody Jacobs and my pronouns are he, him. I want to thank you, Bob, for hosting and thank the Democratic Town Committee for putting this event on. I also want to thank Kathryn and Bruce for being here and being willing to step up and serve our community. It means a lot to me personally to be speaking to this particular group because I'm a proud lifelong Democrat. There was a lot of discussion early on in this campaign on social media about whether or not party affiliation really matters in local elections. And I hope that if the last several years have taught us anything, it's that they do matter a lot at every level of government. But what I want to talk about right now is what my party affiliation means to me personally. Growing up, I was bullied a lot. I was a nerdy kid with a single dad and Jewish name in rural Central Florida, and I didn't fit in very well. And I was very interested in politics from an early age. Like I said, I was pretty nerdy, and I was drawn to the Democrats right away. This was a party that stood up for people who were left out, left behind, and silenced. It was a party of visionaries like Vice President Al Gore, who saw climate change for the global emergency it was decades before its effects became obvious. It was the party of brave leaders like Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who had the courage to be a lone vote against a disastrous war when many people were clamoring for it. It was the party of trailblazers like Congressman Barney Frank, who dared to be himself and open the door for so many others to do so in public life. I never forgot what it felt like to be bullied, and I never forgot who stands up to bullies. I grew up, I went to law school, got married, had kids, but I never stopped staying involved and volunteering for political campaigns. And while the issues may have shifted over time, the fundamental struggle between the wealthy and the working class, between intolerance and inclusion, between ignorance and science has remained the same. And many of these same values inform the reasons that I'm running for Select Board. I want us to focus on affordability and to creating a fair tax system that shifts the tax burden from residential taxpayers to commercial taxpayers because I'm a Democrat. I want to root out systemic racism and commit to equity because I'm a Democrat. And I want to make sure that we take aggressive action on climate change because I'm a Democrat. I want to stand up for everyone who's been left out, left behind, and silenced because I'm a Democrat. So while you won't see a D next to my name on March 29th, you'll know exactly where I stand. I look forward to answering your questions tonight. Thank you.
Great. Thank all 3 of you. You got done within your allotted time. Excellent. So let's begin the questions. And this is a good question, I think, to kick this all off. And we'll start with Bruce with this question. We'll go Bruce, Cody, and Kathryn. Did you have a question, Kathryn? Oh, okay. What would you say are the 1 or 2 most important issues facing the Select Board right now? What would you say are the 1 or 2 most important issues facing the Select Board right now? start off with you, Bruce. You have a minute. You have a minute to answer the question.
Okay.
Excuse me, 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Sorry, 2 minutes to answer the question.
Okay. That's okay. I won't need those extra seconds, Bob. My priority is to get the budget under control, because all things flow from a budget. You can have the greatest plans in the world, but you can't execute on those plans unless you have a balanced budget and you know where you can spend money on things that are appropriate. And developing budgets is something I'm very good at. I'm very good also at working with others to figure out what we can afford to do now versus what we can afford or we need to defer. That's very important because you're reconciling a lot of different competing interests. So I think once we get the deficit under control, I think what we need to do is focus on getting more involvement and working on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's really important to get people included in and participating in government. It pains me when I see the lack of interest in running for town meeting, and we need to understand why that's occurring, what we can do about it. If it's a governance problem, then we need to address that. And I support the creation of a governance committee to do that. But we need to get to the bottom of this, and it's unacceptable to have this as an ongoing issue. So I'm all done. Thanks.
Excellent. Cody.
Thanks for the question. So since launching this campaign, I've knocked on over 800 doors all across Natick, and by far the #1 issue that people bring up to me is affordability. It comes up in many different contexts for many different people, but it all comes down to the same thing, that it's getting very difficult to afford to live in Natick. And of course, recent events have only squeezed people on their budgets. So that's why I think my #1 focus would be on affordability as a member of the select board. I think we can work to improve affordability in a number of ways. I've already mentioned my support for splitting the tax rate and shifting the burden from working families to commercial landlords. But I also support a senior property tax exemption that's specifically targeted to help seniors stay in their homes. I also support increasing our affordable housing stock. I support passing the Community Preservation Act, which would allow us to fund more affordable housing in Natick. And I support increasing our housing stock through more densification, especially near train stations and other places consistent with the Natick 2030 plan. So I think that we face a major challenge on affordability. And really, it ties into so many other issues. You know, I don't think we can talk about the diversity and equity and inclusion without also talking about the affordability problem we have here. When we talk about, you know, I had conversations with Dr. Nolan, for example, about hiring more diverse teachers and how difficult it is because no one can afford to live here. And so I think that, you know, these issues are all intertwined with affordability. Obviously, there's certainly many issues we face, and it's always tough to answer these, you know, pick one issue questions. But to me, affordability would be my top one.
Excellent. And Kathryn.
So I suppose that I'll probably cross two bridges with my answer. One is that first and foremost, it's the budget, because we can't set aside money for housing stock for affordable housing except through the CPA unless we get our budget. Once we get our budget straight and we get our fiscal house in order, we'll be able to provide for and looking and strategic planning, having it built in so that we can allow to have additional money for rental vouchers and for also providing rental housing for people who are whose income is less than the 80% AMI, which is the standard we usually look at, but which is still out of reach for a lot of people. As a small business owner owning a wine store, liquor store for 4 years, I spent 12 long hours a day talking to people. And it inevitably, those questions and comments and their concerns about their lives were affordability. But at the same time, I've spent the last year talking to a lot of business owners. I've talked to the Natick Mall. I've talked to Eli at Eli's Burgers and Breakfast. I've talked to Sharon at Moore's Tavern. And if their taxes go up between 40 and 75%, it's going to drive a lot of them out. I mean, the fact of the matter is 31 tenants have closed in the Natick Mall in the last 2 years. Furthermore, they pay right now their tax bill is 4.6 million, raising it by 40% to save residents 10%, which again is not it's not raising revenue, it's a net transfer. If we do that, their taxes go up to 6.5. So I think we have to do two things. We have to create a provision to allow for those people who are being squeezed. And that's all people, not just seniors. So $100,000 means tested exemption for homeowners on their assessed value. And also looking at businesses and seeing what we can do to help support them. I would put that second after the budget. Thanks.
Excellent. Well, good. Well, your responses lead to some very, very topical questions. And I'm going to go right to one of them, which is, since the budget was on everybody's mind, which it should be on everybody's mind, let me ask you this. Natick has struggled to balance its budget over the last few years, including dipping into stabilization or rainy day funds. What is your understanding of the current state of the town's budget, and what measures would you use to take the pressure off now and over the next 3 years? And why don't we start with Cody?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, we are facing, as the other candidates mentioned, we are facing a structural budget deficit. And we've been tapping into stabilization funds, and it's not sustainable. So, the town administrator has already made several presentations about this, that it looks like we're going to need an operational override. And I support that, because I think we do need to, get our fiscal house in order. We need to make sure that we're replenishing those stabilization funds, and that we're able to adequately fund all the services that we need, like our schools that are facing students who are having learning loss from COVID. So I think it's critically important. But on the other hand, I understand the impact that an override has on working families, and that's why I support tax relief for them. I think that it's critical that we balance those things as we seek to balance our budget. And then the other thing, of course, is looking at spending. Now, I don't want to lead with that, because I don't want people to get the idea that we could solve this. We could cut our way to solving this problem. We can't, at least not without making cuts that I think we don't want to make. But on the other hand, I would certainly have a critical eye to the budget. I understand that's one of the roles, that the Select Board plays, as being the people's voice and asking tough questions of department heads and trying to understand where our money is being spent and if there are ways that we can save, because I do want to explore every option that we can to save people money. But at the end of the day, I want to be transparent with people that an override is going to be required if we're going to maintain the services that we need in Natick. Thank you.
Kathryn.
So what I would say is one of the most important things we can do is look at this to start off with of the question. And oops.
You muted. There you go.
Sorry about that. I'm very heartened that the school superintendent and the town administrator have been looking at both of their budgets to see where there are shared deficiencies. I'm not coming out as a position and saying that we need to conflate all of the shared departments. So that would be things like IT and HR and our accounting software. But what I would say is we need to take a really close look at this and in a collaborative way, figure out places where we have duplications in the budget. So that would be the first thing. And I am extremely impressed with our town administrator and with our school superintendent. And I know that they're working really hard to find efficiencies in the two budgets. And then second of all, I think that we need to develop as a select board a very clear and concise rationale for the override. And what I mean by that is at a time where our residents are being squeezed with rising fuel costs, inflation, potentially having the CPA on the ballot in the fall, we need to have a clear and concise vision about what problem it is we're solving and how we're not going to be here in 3 more years asking for more money. So those are the first two approaches that I would take. Thank you.
Bruce.
Thank you. The current select board, as discussed, has been discussing a possible override. I think we need to step back and understand how that developed. It developed because the town was growing, its needs were expanding, the schools were expanding, and that led to a budget deficit where the the expenses were growing faster than the income coming in. So how do we change that? When there's a looming budget deficit, you have two choices: either cut spending or reduce services. I don't think we're able to really do any of that. So the third choice is to create new growth in the town to fund some of these activities. And that is the business development activity, again, that goes to the commercial tax base, which doesn't put demand on the schools and doesn't require trash pickup. And that's why I believe, and Kathryn alluded to this earlier, is it penalizes, a split tax rate penalizes small business owners, right? If we want to even preserve or attract and retain businesses to downtown Natick, that can't happen. It is a disproportionate penalty to these people have lease agreements that have escalator clauses in them. So all that would do is pass on that increased cost to those family-run businesses such as Brandt Jewelers, Optica, Cilicia, et cetera. So I think we need to grow that pie and make sure that we're getting as many revenue sources as possible. I think also we've talked about the Community Preservation Act. That's another potential avenue to get some revenues in.
Could we do follow up on the split tax issue?
Yes, I was
Okay,
going to do a
thank you.
follow up to you anyway. So,
Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate it.
well,
All right.
well, as I understand it, split tax, this is your idea. So everyone's talking about that. And the
Yep.
notion is that the idea of the split tax would hurt small businesses. And so is there a way the tax could that proposal be rewritten to tax larger businesses, which might encourage smaller business to invest in Natick?
There's a couple things I want to say about this to put some of this. So first of all, we need to step back and put this discussion in context. This is not my radical proposal or something. Not that I have any problem with radical proposals, as we all know, but this isn't a radical one. This is something that most peer municipalities that are similar to Natick have done long ago and have done for decades. Natick is a huge outlier in not having a split tax rate, given our distribution of business and residential, given our demographics. We're a huge outlier. So I think, first of all, it has to start from the question of why do we still have a single tax rate when all these other places do? Now, there's nothing wrong with being an outlier. Maybe there's some reason that it's good to have a tax rate. Maybe it drives a lot of business growth. But if you look at the data, it doesn't show that. In fact, what it shows is there's very little correlation between business growth and the tax rate. And there's studies that have shown that business location decisions are driven by other factors, like the difficulty of getting approvals, appropriate space, zoning, all these other things that are very important that, I think we all agree we need to improve on in Natick. But, we're not seeing this huge growth where we're doing so much better than these other communities that have split tax rates. It's quite the opposite. And you can read more about that on my website at codyfornatick.com. And I appreciate that, people have spoken with business owners, but I've spoken with people like a woman in West Natick who's lived here for 4 decades, who really wants to support our schools, but doesn't know if she can afford another override. Or a family whose child is thriving at one of our elementary schools in Central Natick, but doesn't know if they'll be able to stay here once their lease runs out because they don't know if they'll be able to afford it. So yes, I do, I support it. And the other thing about it is there is a small business exemption that's available to the question that you asked. I don't want to overstate its impact because it would only apply to a few buildings in Natick because it's a cap of $1 million. But because there's multiple businesses in those buildings, it would make some impact. Thank you.
Well done. Well done.
Please have a rebuttal.
Go ahead, Kathryn and Bruce.
Go ahead, Kathryn.
You're muted, Kathryn.
Time with my mute. Sorry about that. So we've talked a bit about data. We've talked about correlation, and I've looked at the data that Cody has, and he's right. There are towns that are peer communities that have seen economic growth according to the Mass DOR over the last 2 years during the pandemic. He's right. That's what you see. That's data. Understanding data, in other words, the why of data as opposed to the how of data, is really critical. And so one example, in Watertown, when I spoke with the tax assessor, I asked, how did you have X $100 million worth of growth with a split tax rate during a pandemic? Two key components. One was $150 million warehouse that was built out into lab space that was on nonprofit. It was not on the tax rolls, sold to a company because there's no lab space in Cambridge anymore. So that was a sudden shift of $150 million onto the tax rolls. That's not necessarily business growth, it's tax growth. There are other examples, towns like Burlington. BJ's was wooed from Natick with a tax incentive financing to go to Southborough with a split tax rate. So we woo these companies to other towns, or they, with a split tax rate, and then we say, we're not going to tax you for 10 years. So that doesn't help the residents at all. It's a very, very complex issue, and it's not just data, it's the why of the data. Thank you.
Bruce.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Kathryn said many of my points, so I'll be brief. A split tax rate raises no additional money for a town. The total tax levy doesn't change. It's set by Prop 2.5 regulations plus new growth. Large taxpayers such as Natick Mall and MathWorks were attracted to build and expand in Natick due to the predictable tax rate. Natick Mall is an aggregation of small and large businesses, not a big amorphous mass. In a recent Metro West Daily News article, the mall is transforming itself to continue its long-term viability, and we should support that. For example, they are intending to have biotech space in the former Neiman Marcus. So I think a split tax rate just puts up a big sign to say, we're not pro-business.
Okay. Are you done, Bruce?
Yes, sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Well, let's stay with the some additional questions that kind of follows along these top issues that each of you expressed. And affordability was one that certainly was on the list for all of you, or several of you. So let me ask you this, which kind of comes from this question we were just talking about. As Natick property values have risen, affordable housing has become less affordable to many. It's an issue we all hear a lot, people talking about. What steps, if any, would you take to help people who are living in Natick but are being priced out by even the affordable definition? And why don't we start with Kathryn?
So one of the things we can do is a means tested tax exemption on the value for a lot of these people who were suddenly living in a my home, I think, is assessed at $500,000, and 2 doors down, a house was just sold a couple of weeks ago for $1.5 million on spec from California on a lot that's considerably smaller than mine. So what we need to do is encourage, the Natick 2030 master plan. The very first item in its goals and recommendation on housing is to provide housing affordable to a full range of income levels. And that's more of an aspirational statement. It's really not like a plan with accountable goals and metrics. I think we need to support seniors who wish to remain in their homes by doing a number of things. We do have the tax deferral program. I don't know if that's publicized as much as it could be. I do know we have a program whereby seniors can work off part of their tax bill for the town. I think currently we have 125 positions, but only 39 seniors doing that. I don't know if that's a matter of a lack of publicity about the program. And then I think that we need to really think about what Cody mentioned earlier, increased densification downtown with smaller units, changing some of our zoning bylaws so that we can have pocket neighborhoods of tiny houses that are 500 to 1,000 square feet, where seniors in town who have a home that's suddenly worth 1.2 million can sell that home and buy a tiny house and live in a pocket neighborhood. But if we do that, we have to make sure that there's transit opportunities. So it really is a very highly interconnected problem that has numerous facets that involves lots of town committees and boards that need to be working together, including the select board. Thanks.
Bruce.
Thank you. I've been giving this a lot of thought lately. As a finance committee member, I've consistently urged support of mixed-use development in downtown Natick, an inclusionary zoning bylaw to help create affordable housing options, and also the creation of affordable housing options close to public transport. We have 2 MBTA stations, and when we locate affordable housing options close to public transit, that benefits people. We also want to foster mixed-use residential and residential buildings in general. Mixed-use residential also has the benefit of bringing more retail to the town and more revenues to the town. It also drives foot traffic to benefit the existing businesses and make them thrive. I think we need to do, as Kathryn described, expand the scope of existing tax relief programs and broaden eligibility. I agree with her that we should have means-tested property tax exemptions and look into that and figure out if that's viable or not. Lastly, the Community Preservation Act can also provide assistance here in providing funds to the Affordable Housing Trust. And when opportunities become available, we can pounce on them as a town. I'm done with that for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Cody.
Well, I agree with a lot of what Kathryn and Bruce had to say on that subject. You know, I do definitely support, you know, density, I think downtown and in other places. I think like West Natick, where I live, I think there's a lot of room for more densification here that could provide opportunities for affordable housing, or at least housing that's a little bit smaller to help people be able to downsize. Another opportunity there is the way that our zoning laws currently treat detached dwelling units. I think there's opportunities where people have big lots and, you know, might want to develop to have like a, you know, a in-law guest house type situation where actually they move into the guest house and then rent out the bigger house. And my understanding is that right now that's a little bit difficult to do under our zoning law, because I think it doesn't allow it has to be a family member or something like that. So I think just, you know, making that a little bit easier for people, to give people options where, you know, they can add extra. I also really strongly agree with the point Bruce made about densification being great for business. I think that's a really important point of what is going to attract the kind of businesses we want downtown, is to increase foot traffic. You know, whenever people tell me like, oh, I don't want to see more densification, I say, wait, but you know, don't you want that pub? You know, like, do we want more of the good stuff we want downtown? And that's a big reason. One thing I do want to raise a little bit of concern about, and I'm not against it, but the idea of the means tested tax exemption that's applicable to everyone. My concern about that I would have, and again, I'm not against looking into it, but is how it would affect people who live in apartment complexes. When you're testing means testing, when you're looking at, you know, the value, you know, usually that involves looking at the value of the assessed value of the property. That, you know, that obviously isn't going to apply to a giant, you know, apartment complex, even though the individual people in the apartment complex may indeed be facing economic pressures. So that's a little bit of a concern that I have about that proposal, but I would still be, you know, certainly open to looking into anything to give people tax relief. Thank you.
Okay. Another idea, just to expand our thinking on this topic, and then we're going to move in some other areas. Town meeting this spring is being asked to vote on a non-binding resolution to support the Fair Share Amendment, which will be on the state ballot in November. The Fair Share Amendment would raise the tax on a person's annual income above 1 million by 4%. In fact, I think it's actually called the millionaire's tax by some. The money raised would go to, and I quote, quality public education and affordable public colleges and universities, and for the repair and maintenance of roads, bridges, and public transportation. Do you support this initiative? And if so, why? And if not, why not? And we'll start with Bruce.
Thank you. I would need to find more information about it before I could say one way or another. In concept, you know, there's nothing to argue about there. There's the objectives to grow the revenue stream to handle things like road repair, which the state does a terrible job at funding. We get about $1 million a year from the state in Chapter 90 money, and the town kicks in $2.5 million a year. Well, that doesn't go very far when you're trying to fix the roads. And you just drive around Natick and you see the results of that. There's been over the past few years a marked deterioration of those roads, and it gets to a point of no return where you're not able to rehab the road, I'll call it, or repave the road. You really have to start from scratch, which is really unfortunate. In terms of the quote millionaires tax, I need to find out more details about it, but I certainly can support it being on the ballot. I personally think, one of the things that you look at is, for example, ordinary income is taxed at a much higher rate than capital gains is. Well, that benefits the ultra rich. So I think, a fair share proposition, I'm not sure what it's called, initiative proposition, would be worth considering. But I'd like to know more details about it, how it would work, and whether, the big thing that I see in my experience has been the loopholes. When you've got people who are designing the tax law for loopholes, and the accountants find them for you. So I think we need to find a way to do that as well, tighten that up.
Excellent. Thank you, Bruce. Cody.
So I strongly support it. I actually signed was proud to sign the petition that got that on the town meeting warrant, because I think it's long overdue, and I think it's a great idea for Massachusetts. And I think it really gets at my philosophy about taxes in general, which I think is something we've talked about a lot tonight. But I don't see taxes as being something where, well, you pay for the services you get, or you're just going to pay based on oh, you're overcharging someone if they pay and they're only using some of the services or something like that. I don't think that's the way to look at taxes. I think we're all in this together. We're all citizens. We're all part of this, in this case, part of the state, but we're all part of Natick too. And I don't think that's the way to look at taxes. To me, it's about who can afford to pay, and what's fair. What's the fair way to assess taxes so that we can get things done that people really need. So for me, the same reasons that drive me to support the split tax rate drive me to support this initiative as well, because I'm not worried about millionaires leaving Massachusetts. I think we're a great state that people are going to want to stay in, just like Natick is a great community to attract businesses to. So I strongly support it. Yes.
Excellent. And Kathryn.
Unmute, Kathryn.
I'm sorry, my mouse just isn't working. So in principle, like Bruce said, it's very hard to be against anything that's going to fund roads and bridges, affordable housing or affordable college, infrastructure, better roads, bridges, trains. So I'm totally in favor of that kind of an outcome. I don't honestly know enough about how the legislature is going to decide to spend the money. And Massachusetts has a really good track record on the whole of taking funds and spending them equitably and appropriately, but also sometimes not so much. So before I commit to saying, yes, this is something I'm glad that we're having a non-binding resolution. So between now and town meeting, I can do more research and more education. But right now, I just don't know. And I agree with you, Cody, that we're all in this together. It's not the case that, we were never blessed with children. We moved here to raise a family. And I don't think twice about voting when it comes to something for our schools, because it's for all of us. But when it comes to the Fair Share Amendment, I wish I could say any more about it. I've actually been focusing a lot more on local issues in Natick. So I will definitely look into that. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Well, speaking about local issues, I got one that is probably on everybody's mind, especially when I received my little postcard from the town about the water, Department of Public Works. And Natick's water quality, so we're shifting a little bit here, expand out to some other areas. Natick's water quality was recently cited by the state as substandard. Was this situation communicated and handled well, in your opinion? And what other preventative measures would you like to see to address this issue going forward beyond the substantial capital funding that was provided by town meeting recently? And we'll start with, I think we'll start with Bruce.
Thank you, Bob. I would just say that the communications could have been better, could have been handled better. I think the information that came out was the partial information that was required by the DEP. And all it said was, we've got a problem, right? So here's what it is, and it directed you to their website for more information. Well, if you went to their website, you'd find that there's a lot of information about what they're proactively doing to remedy this problem. Natick has actually been at the forefront of addressing this emerging requirement as soon as the issue arose. For those who don't know, the Mass DEP changed the standard from, I hope I get this right, 70 parts per trillion to 20 almost overnight. So the DPW chair was right on top of that. And as chair of the DPW subcommittee, I worked with the DPW director to investigate solutions to address this issue. We worked together to get the capital investment for filter technology to before town meeting where it was approved. This resulted in the construction of the filter tanks that you see on Route 9 that will be brought online shortly. And by the way, it was at 0% interest to the town. So by acting quickly, we're on board and on track to solve this problem that many, if not all, the communities are going to see in the near future if they haven't already seen that. I believe most of the surrounding communities have seen that. One of the select board's responsibilities is water commissioner. And I think my experience with all this is to make sure that DPW has all the resources that it needs to ensure the safety of the water supply. They're a very strong department. They work really hard, often in trying conditions. You know, when you have water and sewer problems, it's not a great time for them to be out there, and it's usually in foul weather. So they do a great job.
Great, Cody.
Yeah, I mean, I also want to start by commending the work that DPW has done to address this issue and on very, quick turnaround time, and to get it in front of town meeting so that we could fund it, so that it can be, I mean, I know there've been delays, but that it can be nearing completion, because I think this is obviously critical. I drink the water here, so I definitely want, I want it to be safe. I think as far as communication goes, yes, I think the communication could be a little bit better around it. I was just, myself, when I was, preparing, because I knew this question was going to come up, like I went to the website to see, oh, where are we with this? And it's a little bit difficult to understand, the way that it's written out on there. And I think that highlights one of the needs that we have to, for a chief communication officer, which I know is something that we're working on hiring right now, to be able to make things a little bit more readable, a little bit more user friendly for people, especially on an issue like that, where people are rightfully very concerned. And the only thing that I might like to at least ask questions about whether we could do is to mitigate these kind of communication issues in the future is to have more frequent testing of our water supply, at least while we're seeing how this new mitigation system works, because I want to make sure that people have the confidence that they're not getting a notice a very long time after the fact they've been drinking this water and giving it to their children and pets and things like that. So I think that's what I would want to look into, but I do want to commend the work that DPW and others in government have done on this, because I think that we are moving towards a solution.
Great. And Kathryn.
Yes, another shout out for DPW. They do a fantastic job with very little resources and under pressure all the time with people who are generally always angry. So I also went to the website to read a bit about where we are today. I've been really impressed with how incredibly reactive they've been. I understand some of the problems have been supply chain issues. But for me, there's a question about equity in this. So this information isn't equitably distributed. And by that, I mean, you have to go out and seek it yourself. And then we need to start to understand a lot about what this means. The updates were very helpful, somewhat technical, but gave us a lot of references to on-site resources so we could do more of our own research. And when I say that, I think about my sister who has children, dogs. She works 60 hours a week. She's trying to make dinner. They're trying to sell a house. I mean, people have very full lives. And then there's the pandemic. So I think that it probably could. I don't think that there's anything more that DPW could have done to get the information out there because we don't have the infrastructure to do that. And I would say I was really pleased by them doing a retail point of sale filter study so that those of us in our homes could figure out if we felt that if we did a risk assessment and we decided that this is risky for us, whether we are immune compromised or pregnant or something along those lines, we would have the opportunity to purchase a point of sale filter for our house. So I was really pleased by that. It's just that it's a fire hose of information. And every time those notices come out in the mail, Natick Government Chat, Natick Talks has somebody who pops up and says, hey, I just got this. How do I do my own risk assessment? Although they use different language. You know, how do I understand what this means for me? So we could be doing better. I'm hoping the CIO will help us do that. And again, extraordinarily pleased with the way DPW moved on this when the state regs were changed.
Excellent. Okay, let's shift to another area. Actually, this is one of the areas that you all, several of you mentioned, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Recently, anti-Semitic and racial slurs were found on the bathroom walls at Natick High School in 2 separate incidents. Understanding these incidents took place in the public schools, is there something more Natick as a whole should be doing to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to combat this kind of bigotry? And we'll start with Cody on this one.
Yeah, first of all, as a parent, as a human, I was very disappointed to read about that. And but unfortunately not surprised because this is still a problem in our society. And yes, here in Natick, it's a problem. And I'm glad that that Dr. Nolan is being proactive about addressing the issue. But I think that there's a lot we can do on DEI and specifically to this issue. I think I want to point out that we condemn these slurs, but down the street from the high school, there is a street name that is a racial slur that we've allowed to stay there. A decade after the school committee changed the name of our mascot from that racial slur, there is still a street name down there that is that racial slur. And I think the select board needs to act to change that because it sends a mixed message when we say to people, oh yeah, these slurs are terrible, but then we have a street name that's a racial slur. I would work on changing that. Now, other more structural things, I think that the select board has done a good job with starting to implement the recommendations of the DEI task force. That's something I would want to see continue to carry over. Hiring obviously a permanent DEI officer, I think, is great. The remap recommendations also, I think, provide a good roadmap of things that we can do. But even beyond that, I think that we can center equity in all the conversations we're having. Conversations about government reform, for example, I think need to put equity at the center. We need to ask ourselves, is a town government structure that is reliant so much on volunteers really equitable for people from different walks of life to be able to hold government accountable in a way that's really meaningful? And I have a lot of other ideas on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which you can read on my website, codyfornatick.com. Thank you.
Great. Kathryn.
Like everyone else I know, I was horrified to read about that. This may sound obvious, but when we live in a town that is not terribly diverse, it's it's relatively simple for ignorance to rear its ugly head and display the unconscious bias that's been thrown at them for, thrown at all of us since we were young. When we aren't surrounded by people, when we're surrounded only by people who look like us, who think like us, who pray like us, who are not from differing socioeconomic backgrounds, it's sometimes easy to especially for young people, to act out and participate in these symbols of hate. And I hate to make it sound as simple as just diversifying who we live near, but I think that's a big part of it. It's hard to dehumanize someone when we know someone who's trans or gay or Black or a Republican. So I would say that I want us to work for diversity, to build diversity in Natick for that reason, but also to continue implementing the plans of the diversity, the DEI committee, our task force report, and get a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer on board as soon as possible, so we can see where there are areas of systemic race. Where's the low-hanging fruit in Natick that we can, or is there any? That's all I would say about that. I, as somebody who has spent my entire life with people who aren't like me, I think it's really, really important to introduce our children to people who are not like them. That's all.
Thank you, Kathryn. And Bruce.
Thank you, Bob. Like the two candidates who spoke before me, I agree. The recent actions at Natick High School underscore the importance of eradicating ignorance and divisiveness that's promoted by some media outlets. It's surprising to me that it's more prevalent than we would hope, and we need to confront it at every opportunity. I agree that the DEI committee and the chief diversity officer position are critical in making progress in this area. We need to have a town government that reflects the greater community. I said earlier that 21% of people identify as non-white in the community. We need to reach out to those people, and that has to do with the outreach piece. And there's a lot of multicultural things that, for example, Natick Center Associates does Multicultural Day, and encouraging those sorts of things are very important. To me, we also have to learn as a community about how to handle unintentional bias and careless phrasing. For example, I was in the computer business, and there's the master slave was a term used, grandfathered, and things like that were totally racist in nature. On FinCom, I advocated strongly to support the Town Seal Study Committee. There are many areas in town where there are insensitive images and names, and we must work as a community to eradicate that. Finally, I was, bias is a learned behavior. A kid does not become a racist overnight. He has to be taught that.
Great, thank you. Kathryn, we're going to start with you on this question, and it just builds on the prior question. This is actually from one of our question from one of the audience members. How much training or education do you have in diversity and issues regarding diverse communities? And what workshops have you been to or plan to go to educate yourself on these issues?
It's a great question. So by background, I spent a good deal of my college and graduate school time in the Middle East and in North Africa, working with Palestinians and with Jews, and doing interfaith, being trained in and facilitating interfaith communication. So that was probably a good 10 years of my life. At Harvard, I was at Harvard in executive education for 10 years, and every year I conducted anti-racist workshops, and was also, as a member of staff, I attended a number of different types of workshops and led book readings. So For example, we read The Color of Law. We discussed its impact. We looked at at the impact locally in Cambridge. And then most recently, I was registered to participate in the racial justice workshop from Natick is United, but I was ill for the first two meetings, and when I wasn't able to attend. But when that is reoffered, I will sign up again for that. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that background.
Excellent. Bruce.
Thank you. I worked in the corporate world, as I talked about earlier, and I had many events that were aimed to foster diversity. I worked for several large companies that had worldwide presence, and it was very much a inclusive, worldwide company where they to be productive with these people, you had to put aside cultural differences and actually make an effort to understand cultural differences to get things done. That was a regular ongoing activity. I've done that, but it would never hurt. I've been out of the corporate world for a little while, and I'm sure there's a lot more that I can learn in this area. But I definitely need a refresher course. It's kind of like a CPR course. It wouldn't hurt to get a refresher course on that. What I'm very concerned about is the backsliding that I see in other states where the recent actions at the high school are indicative of this. What's scary to me is how close this runs to the surface. If we thought we were heading towards a post-racial world, but it's clear, we got to fight again for this. This is unfortunate, but it's the reality of the situation. And I work with colleagues. I'm a basketball player. I would actually go to other towns that were certainly not my ethnic background, but I was welcomed there, and they were welcomed in our town. So, it can be done.
Excellent. And Cody.
Yeah, I also want to commend this. It's a great question. So I work in education right now. I teach legal research and writing at BU Law School, and I actually I recently attended a workshop. That's the word. I recently attended a workshop in December that was focused on these issues and how the intersection between DEI and the curriculum and the way that we teach writing specifically, and how language is different across cultural groups and different ways of using English. And it was a really fascinating presentation that I think has really informed the way I teach. And of course, being in the education field, we're updated with trainings every year on DEI issues, and so it's something that's never really far from the forefront of my mind in my professional life. And before that, as an attorney, I have some experience representing marginalized groups, which has allowed me to, I think, understand those perspectives. Like I represented immigrants in long-term detention, for example. I represented veterans, low-income veterans, and facing like landlord-tenant issues and things like that. And I think that that's helpful to broadening my perspective of kind of understanding where people are coming from. And it is like I definitely want to echo what Bruce said. Like it is scary what's going on in our country, and I think that we need to make sure that we're standing tall and standing up for our values here in Natick. And one of the most important of those values is equity. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm going to do another question from the audience. And this is kind of a subtext that's kind of running underneath of all of your answers. And when I saw this question, there was a couple of different ways this was asked, but I thought this kind of got at the issue a little broader. I'm reading what the person wrote. Leading in municipal organizations is different from for-profit corporate organizations. Further, effective leaders of an organization are often uniquely experienced individuals commensurate with the organization's operations. And, oops, hold on. Yeah, commensurate with the organization's operations and goals. Please tell prospective voters how much actual experience you have in Natick's government and making decisions regarding its operations and goals. And we'll start with Bruce.
Thank you. As you know, I've been on the Finance Committee for almost 12 years and a town meeting member for almost as long. I've served in a variety of different chair roles that have exposed me to pretty much any aspect of the town government that's possible. And I have reached out to and spoken with both the police chief and the fire chief to learn more about how what their issues are and what they're confronted with. I'd had a sort of arm's length relationship with them when I was on the Finance Committee, but it's much closer now. I would say, I would want to expand the relationships I have with the town administrator and department heads. I've worked with these people to develop budgets, and I've asked tough questions of them and held them to account for it. And it's not a pleasant thing sometimes, but it is something that is quite necessary. And they understand that you're trying to do the best for your taxpayers, and we're all taxpayers. So you're trying to do the best for your neighbors to get the best value for their money. And I have to say that by and large, the town government is run very well. They have, we are blessed to have some very talented people, very committed people that work for this town. And one of the things that we need to do as a town is find ways to attract and retain quality people and make sure that happens on an ongoing basis. So yes, I've had extensive experience in this area.
Thank you. Cody.
Thank you. So I think on this question, I think this is such an important question because it gets to the heart of like what's important about when you go to vote. And I think that I think that when we think about experience, we need to really think broadly. I don't think that only experience in government, in Natick's government, or even in government in general is what should matter when you're thinking about voting for a position like this. I think that I think government experience is helpful, but I think that we need, if we only focus on one kind of experience and say that's the only kind of experience that counts, we'll just end up getting the same perspectives over and over again. And I don't think that's a way to run our town. I think we need to think broadly about it. The experiences I have that I think matter, like I mentioned, I have experience representing marginalized communities. I think that matters. I have experience working on, as an attorney, I worked on gun control policy, an extremely contentious issue at both the state and the local level. And I worked with stakeholders on multiple sides and from multiple perspectives, both inside and outside of government, to be able to come to agreement and get things done for people and make communities safer. I think that experience matters. I think my experience as a teacher matters, being able to actively listen to people, being able to respond to people's concerns and communicate with people with different learning styles. I think that absolutely matters. My experience as a dad to two young kids who are trying to go through school during the pandemic, I think that matters too. Now, I've also been involved in Natick government. I'm a town meeting member. I'm on the Transportation Advisory Committee. I'm on the Brown School Council. I'm proud of all that, but I think that, that other experience matters too. And I'm really proud of all of it. And I think I would be ready to be on the select board.
And Kathryn.
So I served on town meeting for quite a while. I don't know how many years. I'm going to say off and on for 10 years. And during that time, researching the budget process, I rarely, I often reached out to department heads, to professional staff when I didn't understand something. So that was one way that I was very involved. I also served on the Zoning Board of Appeals for 5 years. And that was something that, taught me a lot about how the town works, working with the planning board, understanding land use, but also over the last year, I've spent a tremendous amount of time meeting with people in town, meeting with employees, meeting with representatives from unions, meeting with teachers, meeting with others to find out what their challenges are and what they need from the select board to effectively execute their mission and serve the town.
Great. Thank you.
Could I add one more thing, Bob? A year ago, I proposed at town meeting an article to examine what the town could do in response to a town meeting member's actions, whether expulsion, censure,
Yes.
or discipline. And that was a very difficult question to formulate. We have a committee. I'm very proud of the way that the committee has come together in 4 or 5 sessions doing deep dives and coming up with a collaborative way of understanding how to deal with this very sensitive subject. And I'm not the chair of the committee, but I'd like to say that I led a lot of the discussion. I know that our moderator and the chair of the committee would agree that I've led the committee in terms of the writing and the research and the legal research. So it's something I'm really proud of, because it could have been an experience that was unpleasant or volatile or confrontational, and it wasn't. Thanks.
Okay. Here's a question I have to ask, given where I live, about the Charles River Dam. What solution, and we'll start with Cody on this. What solution or plan do you favor for the South Natick Dam? And please explain why.
Well, actually, part of my answer to that, I think, goes a little bit back to the previous question in a way about experience, because I think one of the ways that I would approach being a select board member is deferring where I don't have knowledge. And I think that, hydrology and the flow of rivers and how dams work, I'll be honest, that's an area I have very little knowledge of. I mean, I've read up on the reports that have come out of the committee, and I've been keeping up with it and learning as much as I can, but I definitely am going to defer and think about, learning more from their recommendations. Now, that said, I'll tell you what my priors are on it, which is that based on everything I've learned from reading all that information, I definitely lean towards the removal option. I think the removal option of the dam is, again, preliminarily, I'm not saying like I'm 100% going with that. I do want to keep an open mind when I see their final recommendations, but it seems like it's the best recommendation environmentally for restoring the flow of the river, ecologically speaking, keeping the temperature consistent in the river. From a cultural standpoint, some indigenous voices have called for the removal and restoration of the river. And also from a cost standpoint as well, I'm concerned about the ongoing costs to the community if we do go with the restoration. I mean, the restoration itself, but then also the possibility that we'll have to restore it again at some point, or that other failures could come from it. So from a fiscal standpoint, I just feel like it's risky. I mean, it's so pretty. I do understand that. Like I love going down there and looking at it. So like I get that perspective, but I think based on what I've read, my inclination is that I would support the removal option. Obviously with the big caveat that, I don't want to put myself in a position of, prejudging before the final recommendations are made. Thank you.
Kathryn.
So I agree with almost everything Cody said, insofar as I am waiting. I want to defer to the experts. I'm waiting for the final report. I do have a soft spot for the indigenous voices that would like to see the river return to its natural habitat. I mean, originally the Charles River was dammed several times, and to drive Indians away from, and American Indians away from the river, and frustrating their food supply, their non-seasonal food supply. That's something that informs my decision. But more than that, there's the cost, and then there's also the potential liability. So we repair the dam and it fails, and the town is responsible for potential catastrophic losses. One question that's outstanding for me that I haven't been able to find in the research is the impact on downstream, on the loss of downstream land for people who have lands that abut the river. How do we address the potential loss of earth? So I'm waiting for a final report. I'm very open-minded. I've told you kind of what my sympathies are, but I do want to do whatever's best from a fiscally prudent standpoint and also from an environmental standpoint for the town of Natick.
Thank you. And Bruce.
Thank you. Full disclosure, my wife's the planning board rep to the Dam Advisory Committee. And I do tell her when she has a meeting, I said, do you have a dam meeting today? And she takes it wrong sometimes, but be that as it may. So a lot of what has been said earlier is true. Both Cody and Kathryn have alluded to the fact that they need to keep an open mind. They need to hear the report and the findings on it. None of us are experts in this area, but the team that they put together for the Dam Advisory Committee has representation from pretty much a who's who in the environmental community and understanding conservation issues, understanding river flow issues, understanding wildlife impacts. All those things are being studied. Possible unintended consequences are being studied. If you look at a study committee and you look at the thoroughness with which these people are investigating, it's pretty remarkable. I had the good fortune to go up to Andover where they removed a dam and to see firsthand and talk to people who were involved in that project and to see what had happened. And one of them was the conservation manager for Andover. And I asked him, because you look at it and the stream flows beautifully, you hear the sounds of water, and it just sounds like the water going over the dam in South Natick. It's pretty amazing. I actually did a short video to send to Jillian Wilson Mark. And the other thing was the vegetation all grew back. Once they rerouted the river, everything grew back. If you didn't know better, you'd swear it was always there.
All right. And this will probably be the last question based on the time. But I think it's a good question to end with. And Bruce, you finished last on that one, right? So that means we'll go with Kathryn. Back to the beginning again. Members of the select board, as a result of your position, have an opportunity to shine a spotlight on issues of your choice, even things that aren't necessarily in the purview of the select board. What current issue do you feel doesn't get enough attention and you would like to spotlight? Kathryn.
That's a great question. I think that I don't think we talk enough about how hard our town employees, our professional staff work and how much they do with little resources. I mean, those of us who are kind of in the in circle of local government, we all talk amongst ourselves, but I think I would really like to show how, I mean, DPW gets blood from a stone and they're out rain or shine. Our clerical staff union gets 2% raise every year and inflation is rising at 6 to 7%. And they still show up, but they do an excellent job. Many of them work late and long hours. They're very diligent. Could things be better? Sure. Could we get our meeting minutes up on the website more quickly? Probably. But I think that we don't talk enough about our professional staff and our town employees and what they do. And that includes our police officers, our fire department, the Council on Aging. I'm just really impressed. The last year I've spent meeting with people in town, I'm extraordinarily impressed with the way people just pick up the phone and ask some of my very arcane or answer some of my very arcane and silly questions. I talked to Dorothy and payroll the other day and I said, hey, I'm Kathryn Coughlin. I don't know if you've heard, I'm running for select board and I have a really strange personnel question. And she spent a good 15 minutes on the phone with me. I was deeply, deeply thankful and impressed. So I guess that's probably one that doesn't really get a lot of attention, or an issue that doesn't get a lot of attention. Thanks, Bob.
Excellent. Bruce.
Thank you. I would say you kind of have the, and by the way, this was a great question to end with. An area that I think doesn't get enough attention and should but is the whole environmental sustainability and how Natick passed a resolution to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. Well, to get there, there are a number of interim steps that have to happen. As chair of the Capital Committee, I talked about this. I did a lot of things like retrofitting LED lighting, adding solar arrays to municipal buildings, converting to LED street lights, and transitioning town vehicles to hybrid technology. And I think we need to, first of all, the town did a great thing in first hiring a sustainability manager and making her position a director level position. So now she's a peer with other department heads. So I think I want to press the town to employ clean energy when replacing existing systems. The two libraries are actually replacing their HVAC systems with air source heat pumps. That's a breakthrough. And I want to see us doing a lot more. I think we need to keep the pressure up on our representatives at Beacon Hill to keep putting out policies that help with us and reaching the goals that we're looking for. I want to also use the bully pulpit. We've started on this road to get more high-speed charging stations. And that's critically important to making this happen. The last thing I'd talk about is we need to have shovel-ready sustainability projects. So when money becomes available, Natick's first in line.
Excellent. And Cody.
Yeah, I mean, those are both great answers, and I agree 100%. Especially, I can so relate to Kathryn's stories about calling up people and just having them talk to you for 30 minutes. I mean, it's just amazing. I'm just some guy who's running for something, and they'll take time to educate me. That's just, yeah. I mean, I just can't sing their praise enough. But just to give a different answer, what I'll say is sort of picking up on the end of what Bruce was saying, is that I would like to see us. It's something I would focus on is a little bit more state level advocacy for things that would be good for Natick. I think there's a lot we can do to use our platform. You know, we've got some long tenured representatives on Beacon Hill who are very good for us and do good work for us. And I think that I'd like to, use that platform to advocate for changes that will be good for Natick. I think a lot of times when we talk about Natick local government issues, we're sort of working within the framework that exists under state law, and we don't, we need to think about like, well, how could we change that to make things easier? Like we debate about taxes, but then, some of these constraints are because of constraints that are set by state law that don't allow us to do things that maybe are taking a more innovative approach. So I think, maybe making more use of home rule petitions and things like that would be a good way to push for these unique things we can do. We can also, push for more openness. I think that the open meeting law is really in need of an update. I think there's a lot of things about the open meeting law that are great. I'm very pro transparency, but I think that in some ways it actually undermines transparency because it keeps people from having conversations with their representatives on different platforms. So I think that that's something that if I was on the select board, I would try to, use that platform, the bully pulpit, as Bruce put it, to try to advocate for changes on the state level that would help us here in Natick to be a better government and be a better town.
Great. Well, we could probably continue doing this because there's so many more issues and so many questions, and the responses we've been getting from each of you has been enlightening and illuminating. And so it's been, at least I've learned a lot from this session. So I hope everyone else has. But we have to close because we did commit to a time frame. And with that, as you know from the rules, each of you has 90 seconds to do your closing statement. And with that, I'm going to start with Bruce. We'll go Bruce, Cody, and Kathryn. So Bruce, take it away.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Democratic Town Committee for organizing this forum, Bob Arkward for doing a stellar job moderating it, and all of you for listening and participating in tonight's discussion. I really love Natick and helping our community, whether coaching youth sports, volunteering at the Morse Institute Library or TCAN, or serving on the Finance Committee in a leadership role. For more information about me, my community involvement, my accomplishments, and my priorities, please visit brucefornatick.org. I hope what you've heard this evening demonstrates that my proven leadership, knowledge, temperament, and record of accomplishment will serve you well on the Select Board. If elected, I will do all that I can to make Natick the best community it can be by working to advance my priorities: fiscal sustainability, economic development, environmental sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion, excellent town services, accessible town government, and affordability. In closing, I respectfully ask for your vote on Tuesday, March 29th. Let's move forward together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. Cody.
Well, I also want to thank the Democratic Town Committee, and thank you again, Bob, for moderating. And thanks to Bruce and Kathryn as well for being here and having a great discussion about the issues. As we've heard tonight, Natick does face many difficult issues as a town. And to tackle these issues, we need a bold, progressive voice on the Select Board. Let's make Natick more affordable and our tax system fairer. Let's make Natick a leader on equity by reforming our government and confronting racism. And let's make Natick a sustainable community that preserves our open spaces and protects our planet. President Barack Obama once said, change is never easy, but it's always possible. On March 29th, I'm asking for one of your 2 votes for the Select Board so we can make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. And now Kathryn.
I want to thank the Natick Town Democratic Committee and Bob for excellent moderation, the audience for some very interesting questions, and Bruce and Cody for a thoughtful discussion tonight. If elected, I will work hard to support our residents, especially those who are less fortunate and who are disproportionately affected by rising fuel costs, inflation, job insecurity, or other negative consequences of the pandemic. I'll work to expand affordable housing and by 2030, meet most of the goals of our net zero action plan. I will uphold the goals of the Select Board in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I will promote and expand our commercial base to support our long-term fiscal goals. If I'm fortunate to be elected to serve you, the voters of Natick, I can promise you several things. I will always show up prepared and having done my homework. I'll be available by phone, email, and to meet you in person so that you may share your thoughts and insights. I won't make policy decisions without seeking input from all of the stakeholders on an issue, including those who cannot sit in numerous meetings or read pages of minutes. You might not always agree with me, but I will be transparent in my decision-making. I may even tell you I just don't know yet. But I will work hard for the best outcome for all of Natick's residents, those who participate in town government, those who cannot or do not participate, and for our town employees who serve us so well. I hope I've earned one of your 2 votes for Select Board tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, one and all the candidates, Kathryn, Bruce, and Cody, for the quality of your responses, your care, your effort, and thoughtfulness. We want to also note that in the chat, if you haven't noticed, each of the candidates have their website is noted in the chat. So if you want to get more information about them, you should go in there and click on that so you can open that up into your browser and be able to look at it later. I want to thank the volunteers, Craig Bystrinsky, who's done a fabulous job on timekeeping and have been a timekeeper for such an event. I've done this before. It is not easy to do that. So thank you, Craig, for a great job on that. I also want to thank Heidi Larson and Karen Schlossberg for being our Zoom jockeys and doing all this great behind the scenes work that you all don't even know. So thanks to 2 of you. And then finally, thank all of you for coming to this event and listening carefully and critically listening and informing yourselves about these candidates so that you can go to the polls on Tuesday, March 29th, making an informed choice for yourself and for our community. So with that, we thank you for your time this evening, and that concludes our forum.